Alright, hey everybody. It's 8th hour. I wanted to share this video with you. It's not going to be including the Kahoot questions, second hour. I know, Trinity, I told you I would include that, so don't worry, I'll post something tomorrow for you second hour, so that you have something to base your Kahoot responses off of. And I'll also post the code for the Kahoot so you can play it by yourself or with your friends or whatever you want to do, since you guys have that 11th grade meeting. Alright, Unit 3, which is a lot of information. There's going to be like different things in the Kahoot too, but we'll work it out. Let me get this in front of me because that's going to be more helpful. What is, actually, let's just like be real fancy. Maybe. Maybe not. Maybe. Okay. What is feudalism? Feudalism is a system that was used in medieval, I can't stand how off that is. There we go. Feudalism is a system that was used in medieval Europe. It goes lords, knights, merchants, and then peasants and slaves below that. Remember, slaves were different in that context than what we see as slavery in the U.S. because then you could like dip in and out of slavery to a certain extent. Like it depended on how much money you owed people. But we've talked about that before too. Feudalism was what was in place from the fall of the Roman Empire pretty much to the rise of absolutism and kings in that way. Yeah, it wasn't that great, but it worked really well because it was regional, so you didn't have to depend on what someone said from really far away. You could just work on, like you were just listening to the word of the Lord that worked directly above you, and maybe he was responding to someone further away, but you weren't always swearing allegiance to that person in the same way that you were swearing allegiance to the Lord directly above you. It was just an easier means of communication, especially in that time period. What was the Renaissance and what caused the Renaissance? The Renaissance was a rebirth of Greek and Roman culture in their glory days. And it was caused, for the most part, by the Black Plague. I know that's not what you guys are going to have written down because you're going to Google it, and that's not what it's going to say. But in reality, the developments that came, like the medical developments that came out of the Renaissance and the exploration in the human body, happened because of how many crazy things happened during the Black Plague. And also, it's kind of morbid, but the population decline made it so workers were scarce, so they were paid more. So with that excess in money, the economy began to do better. And with the economy doing better, people began to be able to invest in the arts, which is kind of like the Renaissance. Sorry, my hair is so knotted that I like couldn't, look at that, see? Oh, it's like there's a ball in there of just knots. I'm just gonna, I shouldn't have started this. Why did I start this? Okay. When did the Black Plague happen? 1340s. Yeah, rats brought it over. I think we talked about that before, though. Where is the seat of the Catholic Church? Vatican City, Italy. Vatican City is like juxtaposed pretty much inside of Rome. So that's where the Catholic Church sits, which is why it's so strong in Italy and Spain, I think. Yep. Where did the Reformation begin? It began in northern Germany, which is quite a ways. Not quite. It's like decently far from Italy, which makes sense that there could be dissent there and it wouldn't have been squashed out right away. Who started the Reformation? Martin Luther. He posted his 95 Theses on a door of a church in northern Germany, stating these are the 95 things that the church would need to change in order to truly be Christian. At that point, the church had gotten pretty, how do we say this, greedy. They were showing a lot of their wealth. The priests didn't seem to be, a lot of them didn't seem to be living the life that was prescribed in the Bible. It's just like the Bible and the church at that time were just not matching when it came to the Catholic Church, so that's why the Reformation began. Luther had to hide for most of his life, but he started a revolution that changed all of Europe, and then most people in the U.S. are, not most people in the U.S., there's like a reference to these people called WASPs in the U.S., and those are white Protestant people. Protestants came from the Reformation, and the Reformation happened because of Martin Luther, so he for sure changed the course of history massively. Man, my lips are dry. I'm just a mess. I'm tired. 8th hour. It's never this productive. Alright, list 5 denominations either stem from Protestantism or Lutheranism. Well, the Lutheran Church came out of Protestantism. The Anabaptists, the Anglican, which would be the English version of a Protestant church, with the King of England at the head of it, which is just odd in my mind, but that was very important to them, and it came along with like the distribution of power. Baptists, Quakers, and Methodists. So there's 6. So you got 6. We did that sheet though that went through all of them. So maybe you have that sheet, maybe you don't. But if you remember it, that's great. What factors made the Mongols more successful with their expansion? Horses, merit, and horses were one of them. Everybody knew how to ride because they all lived in the plains. So they all had horses. So imagine like having partial foot soldiers, partial horses, and some people with bow and arrows, and you see everyone coming at you with bow and arrows on horses. It'd be very intimidating. What is popping up on my computer? The other thing would be merit-based promotions. They promoted people according to their skill instead of their family lineage to begin with. And in reality, the Mongols began to fall apart as an empire once they started promoting people according to family. Like when the Khan started to separate the Mongol Empire into 5 different sections, that was the downfall of this united empire concept, and it was because none of the sons thought that they should be sharing, or they all thought they had rights to all of it. It was just extra. Got a message. Why was the Taj Mahal built? Next unit, we're going to be talking more about the East, but I just wanted to throw this in because I know we talked about it. The Taj Mahal was built as a shrine to Shah Jahan's favorite wife, who was the emperor at the time. So she died. He built it as a shrine to her after she died. People think that it's like some religious building or somewhere people live, but it's not. It's just a shrine, but it's beautiful. What is the name of the empire that modern-day Iran bases its history in? That's the Safavid Empire. When we think of like Persia and the beauty that comes out of the Middle East, a lot of it can be associated with the Safavid Empire. Also, the rise and maintenance of having a heavy Shiite population comes from the Safavid Empire. Yeah, so we remember the majority of the world's Muslims are Sunni, but there are specific countries where they have majority Shiite population. Well, what did the Europeans bring to the Americas? They brought horses, bananas, apples, weapons, disease, livestock, coffee, and sugar. The majority of those things, outside of the horses, the bananas, and the apples, they don't really help anyone, right? Weapons, meh. I'm not a fan. Disease, I mean, eventually we all would have had to like become, like, I couldn't travel to Europe if we weren't used to the diseases there, but it was rough the way that it was spread. Livestock, I know a lot of people eat meat, but we don't need to eat meat, and livestock is one of the largest polluters in the world. Like, pollution, they are one of the industries that cause the most pollution in the world. Coffee and sugar completely destroyed everyone. Like, if you started off mining for gold and things like that in South and Central America, eventually you started working on bananas, coffee, and sugar plantations. So most of those companies are owned by people in the U.S. or people in Europe, but the people who are working really hard in those fields are mostly from Central and South America. So none of these things worked out that well for the Americas, people in the Americas. What factors caused the decline of the American civilization upon arrival of the Europeans? Disease, yes. That's the largest thing, right? The concept of divide and conquer, the Spanish, the English, everyone would find these local tribes and pit them against each other and plan to be their allies, and then eventually turn against those groups that they allied with. And once they did that, they had conquered the whole area. Like, if you factor in the disease with that, there's no way that the natives Americas would have made it, which is a bummer. And this concept of forced religious conversion. Most of Central and South America are Catholic right now, and part of that is because of forced religious conversion, which is a bummer. But what was interesting is when I was in Guatemala, they showed me how each of the saints, like all of the representations in Catholicism, were like a veil for the pre-existing religions. Yeah, somebody's getting yelled at downstairs. We're a veil for the pre-existing religions that were already existed for the Mayans and other groups. What languages were most prominent in North America following the settlement of the Europeans? French, Spanish, English, and Portuguese, which are still pretty prominent. If you look up like the most popular languages, it's going to be different. But French, Spanish, English, and Portuguese are the most common. French, probably the least common out of the four. Why did Europeans become so reliant on the Atlantic slave trade? Because of all the labor and the native population of the Americas was affected by disease, so they just weren't strong enough to maintain. But the African people that they kind of stole from Africa, I mean, they were sold, but the African people that they took from Africa and brought over here, Africa is close enough to Europe that they had already experienced a lot of those diseases, so they were stronger. I don't want to say, like in the book it kind of makes it sound like they were physically like stronger, but in reality I think that it was just that they had a stronger resistance to the diseases. List 4 countries in Europe and 1 monarch for each country. Blah, 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 blah. Write a short description. All right. Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain sent Columbus. They also were considered like, I don't know if the right word. Everybody got these different titles from the Pope, and one of them was Defender of the Faith. I think that's what Ferdinand and Isabella got. But they were hardcore Catholics, and they kind of justified going to the U.S., going to the Americas, as a means of like converting more people to Catholicism. Like it was almost like a head count, which is kind of scary. But they were afraid because of the Reformation happening. They were afraid that Catholicism was just going to like diminish and then not exist. So in order to maintain that, the Pope lent his hand with as much power as he could. And Ferdinand and Isabella, with them all combined, they had a lot of power. Yes, what's interesting is Columbus is actually Italian, but he sailed for the Spanish, which makes sense. I feel like that happened for a lot of places, but I never thought of it before. Louis XIV is the Sun King. He built Versailles. He was really smart. He built Versailles, and then he invited all the nobles and elite out there so that they wouldn't question any of the things he was doing back in Paris with the government. So he pretty much like placated them in order to get whatever he wanted. Very smart man. Didn't work out though, because he completely robbed the country of France of most of their money, and then no one had any food. Elizabeth I was considered the Virgin Queen. She never got married, and since she never got married, she ruled the entire time. She was considered one of the strongest rulers. She had a lot of issues with this girl Mary, Queen of Scots, because Elizabeth wanted to control Scotland, and Mary was Catholic, and Elizabeth was Protestant, and way too many issues surrounding that whole religious difference at the time. So Elizabeth I would be my person that I'd mention from what's now the UK, but what was then England. Last one would be John II from Portugal. He signed the Treaty of Tordesillas. That was a treaty demarcating exactly where people had control of the different parts of the Americas. So they drew a line and said that Portugal will have this part and Spain will have this part, which is why in Brazil people speak Portuguese. Okay. Yep, that was all 4. What is absolutism? A monarch ruling with unquestioned power. Which is why I kept asking everybody about Game of Thrones today. They have great examples. What Dutch company made Holland rich in the 1700s? The Dutch East India Trading Company made them very rich. Mostly because of spices and salts and things like that. And tulips for a little bit. What are the pros and cons to absolute monarchies? Pros would be if you have a lot of religious diversity or ethnic diversity, any sort of diversity, and you are an absolute monarch and you rule on this basis of fear, you kind of hold things together, right? Like, the country might dissolve into a bunch of little pieces if you don't scare everyone into maintaining being what they are, which is how France functioned to a certain extent. What was I watching that was about that? I was watching something about it was a book I was reading about Iraq and how everybody respected Saddam Hussein because he, like, kept all the religious factions together to a certain extent on the basis of fear. So there are values to these, like, dictators, because if they're not there, there might be a power vacuum, which is not good, or there might be, like, chaos, which is also not good. So some people would rather, most people, I feel like, in the whole world, most people would rather live in a situation where they have, like, a horrible dictator than live in absolute chaos, because then there's no semblance of power at all. Cons. They're really expensive. They usually run up a lot of debt doing stupid stuff. I don't want to say stupid stuff, but a lot of it is really stupid stuff. And none of those things that they're doing really help their people at all. They just feel entitled because of their title that they inherited. Also, it's not inherited by merit, so you don't, like, become an absolute monarch because you're great. You become an absolute monarch because you're someone's son who was an absolute monarch before. And the concept is that, like, as their son, they obviously invested in training you to be a good king or queen, king usually. Reference to Game of Thrones right here. Joffrey, however you say his name, Joffrey. He is the epitome of an example of how absolute monarchy is horrible when it comes to not basing its appointments off of merit, because he destroys things and he's crazy. He's little, too, for being crazy. Like, a lot of the other kings get crazy when they're old. He was, like, young and crazy, probably because of incest, which was also happening a lot in this time period because people were afraid to allow anyone outside of the family to have power. So they were like, we have to keep the power in the family, so y'all gotta marry each other. Okay. Yep, that's what I got. On to the back. What religions created divides in France at the time of the Enlightenment? That would be Protestant and Catholicism. They tried to create a lot of treaties to fix that, but it didn't go very well. So a lot of Protestants put, like, walls up around their cities to try to keep themselves safe. And then they were told they had to take all of the walls down. It was just very tumultuous because France sits in between Germany and Spain and has Italy kind of to the east, to the southeast. So sitting in that space with German Protestants to the east, Catholics to the west, Catholics to the south, this, like, mixed bag that is the UK above them, because half of, like, the lower part of the UK was expected to be Catholic, was expected to be Protestant, and the upper part of the UK, which would be Scotland, was very Catholic. So, and then Ireland was Catholic. There was just, like, everything was so tumultuous and mixed around them that made sense that France was a mess, trying to balance all of that. What was Versailles? We talked about that. Versailles was a palace built to contain the French elite. I just think it's so smart. Like, let me build the most lavish palace ever to exist in, like, the French mind, and I'm just gonna put all of you in it and hope you stay, and if you try to leave, I'll create diversions for you to stay, but the hope is that you just stay in that palace. And if you stay in that palace, you will have no input on any of the decisions that we make, so I don't have to deal with you. I could just, like, do whatever I want. What a smart guy. Alright, what is a czar? Sometimes it's spelled Tzar, sometimes it's spelled Czar. That's because we don't have the same alphabet as Russian people. Tsar is based off the word Caesar, and it is, like, just the leader of Russia. Ivan the Terrible was the first Tsar of Russia. Though he's called Ivan the Terrible, he's not that terrible. He actually created a very strong central administration in Russia, and without that they wouldn't have been able to maintain any of the control that they had later. So for Russia being so large, the fact that he created a central administration system to send information out via and receive information through, props to him. That was awesome. My nose really itches. Okay. It's so cold outside. It's cold up here, actually. What is Westernization? Westernization is the adoption of European culture. So anywhere that Europe colonized, man, my nose is like burning. Anywhere that Europe colonized, there was Westernization. Like, and the expectation now where people kind of want to be Western, they want to wear Western clothes, and the idea, there's this thing called Eurocentrism, that like Europeans do it best and everybody should just dress like the Europeans and act like the Europeans and speak like the Europeans, was something pushed by European colonizers, which is going to be the next word we talk about. And it like forced all of these indigenous groups to either, like it forced them to change in order to see value, or to be seen as valued by Westerners. Man, my screen keeps going dark and I'm afraid it's just going to like turn off. Okay. What is colonization? Settling into or controlling an area or people in a land you are not indigenous to. So going somewhere that is not yours and taking over and claiming it for yourself. Now, the way that they justified doing a lot of this is the Europeans thought, like, we're bringing them faith, we're bringing them proper government, we're bringing them all these fancy things, which is more concept on the Eurocentrism situation. You should also for sure be questioning why Europe is in the center of the map, probably because Europeans drew the map. It's just like, you gotta be thinking about these things all the time. All the time. We should always be thinking about these things. Okay. Oh gosh, I could just sleep right now. Okay. The next question is, what two groups fought in the English Civil War from 1642 to 1645? Now, I know this sounds really specific, but it was in the information. I feel like I filled my eyebrows this morning, but they don't look like it anymore. Yeah. Okay. I know this is really specific, but it was in the information that you guys read and created those posters on. And what's important about it is that the parliamentarians and the royalists were fighting. So that means that parliamentarians wanted there to be a parliament, so they wanted power and decision-making to be split from the monarch to a parliament. Royalists wanted the monarch to continue making all the decisions. A lot of this the divides were created by like people's education levels or by people's attachment. Like if the monarch had similar things to them, like if the monarch was white and Protestant and, I don't know, grew up in the same neighborhood area as you would be like, yeah, you know what, let them make all the decisions because they're making them for me and they're great, so why would I want that to change? But parliamentarians were more based on the concepts that came out of the Enlightenment, of this idea, like, there needs to be divided control and people need to have a say in their government. Or people that just weren't benefiting from the current system. Oh, look at that light come in. Oh, so bright. Okay. Okay. Oh God, it's so bright. I'm dying over here. All right, last few. What scientific developments came from the Enlightenment? Development of natural law. God, it is so bright. Maybe if I'm not going to be able to get it. Okay. Development of natural law. Development of astronomy, the concept of like what rotates around what, the sun, the moon, the earth, all of those things, and the basic developments of chemistry. So natural law was probably the most important thing, and that's physics. Those were the things that really came from the Enlightenment. How did the church cope with these scientific developments? The concept of deism became a thing. So deism is God allows natural law to exist. So it's like, okay. The other way was to kill people if they said something against the church. So most scientists would come out with some revolutionary stuff that really made sense, that went against what the church said, and the church would be like, take it back, we're going to kill you. Or they would just run away from the church and go hide somewhere that was Protestant, hope that they could save themselves doing that. So those were the two different responses of the church, which, is what it is. But I think it stunted a lot of growth. I think we could have grown a lot more if the church was not like, shh, it's not in the Bible. All right, name 3 philosophers and what concepts they are known for from the Enlightenment. Voltaire, Candide, which you guys read, I'm just going to pull the last quote from his book, and that is "Cultivate Your Garden." He was really interested in like the human and how everyday people can maintain themselves, because he grew up middle class. So the concept of like you need to let go of a lot of these expectations that you have, and you just need to start cultivating your own garden, and focusing on what you have to grow and being okay and content with what you have and what is around you, right? Because Candide found her, and she was not as pretty as she was long ago, and he was like, what was I doing? I was basing everything off of like my beautiful coon good, and she was just not good anymore. All right, next would be Rousseau created the social contract, the idea that a government has to be an agreement between the people and whatever government is in power, which goes against absolute monarchy, because that's not an agreement. That's like, we tell you what to do and that's it. Last would be John Locke. He believed in life, health, liberty, that every man has a right to life, health, liberty, and possessions. Every man has a right to all of those things, which sounds pretty familiar because the Declaration of Independence was based off of that concept that he believed in. How did those concepts from the Enlightenment create space for political change and revolution? Right, so all this information is coming out. People are getting educated. People are like, we can't be living this life we've been living. And it creates this understanding that people have enough power to overthrow an absolute monarch, and that's what democracy was born out of, which goes to the next one. What government types did countries begin to take on as absolute monarchs fell from power? That would be like parliamentary democracy, or parliamentary monarchy. There we go. So there's a monarch still, which is what the UK did, or Britain or England, however you want to call them. They used to be straight monarchs, and then they introduced the parliament, and then they shared power, and now the monarch is kind of just a figurehead completely. Other places you see republics and democracies spring up, like Germany and France and Spain and Italy. That's all. That's all of them. Thank God that's all, because I'm exhausted. I'm tired, and it's 3. So I got other things to do. I hope you guys have a good time studying. I hope the Kahoot goes well tomorrow, because I'm about to write that while I nanny. Yeah, that's all I got. Okay. Oh my God, 27 minutes. Sorry. I didn't mean to do that.